On this episode, two medical mysteries that defied the experts.
Her eyes kind of rolled into the back of her head, and she completely stopped breathing.
We started to both wonder, will she be normal?
From the moment Kylie Monica is born, doctors are baffled by her bizarre deformities, forcing her parents to take matters into their own hands.
She had to be fixed. I had to fix her. I couldn't let her go.
Then, star athlete Michael Iniguez is blindsided by a horrifying constellation of symptoms that stops him dead in his tracks.
I was asking myself, how did he get this sick and so fast?
Our son was fighting for his life, and there was nothing that we could do.
I remember just laying in my bed, just confused and scared. I thought maybe I was gonna die.
In the spring of 1998, Heather and Joe Monica were happier than they'd ever been. The couple had just moved into a new home in Rumson, New Jersey, and they dreamed of filling it up with children.
Joe and I had always talked about wanting to have 10 kids. We had 3 kids at the time. Joe had 2 kids from his first marriage who only lived blocks away and would come to the house every day after school.
Our house was a real circus. I mean, it was very hectic, but we would have it no other way.
My daily routine was getting up, making breakfast and laundry and the dog and diapers nonstop. I was a mom. That's all I ever wanted to be.
I worked full-time during the day, doing private security from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and at 4 p.m. to midnight, I worked my shift at the police force. But the highlight of each day was to come home for lunch and see Heather and the kids.
Things were moving along beautifully. The only plans Joe and I had for the future was more kids.
And that July, their wish comes true when Heather learns she's pregnant with a little girl.
I wanted the name to be beautiful, and when I was looking up names, I found out that the Aborigine word for beautiful is Kylie.
Everything was good. Her OBGYN visits were perfect. We were just waiting for the big day.
And on April 23, 1999, the moment finally arrives.
I was in labor for a good 18 hours. As soon as she came out, we knew there was something wrong. They just whisked her away. It was just silence, and it was scary. I had already had 3 kids, so labor and delivery was normal to me. So to have a situation where what I had been familiar with was different and that there was things that were wrong was very unsettling.
Minutes later, the doctor returns to give the worried parents an update.
She had an extraordinarily low birth weight, only 5 pounds for a full-term baby.
He said, are there any type of birth defects in your family? And we both looked at each other and said, absolutely not.
When he explained to us that she had a deformity to her right thumb, there was no bone in it.
And he said she has a cleft palate as well. The roof of her mouth isn't there. We were both worried and very upset. We had had 3 prior births that were uneventful, and nothing like this had ever crossed our paths.
We were absolutely stunned and overwhelmed. I didn't know what all of this together meant.
They were still observing her at that point, but they were going to start some genetic testing for what they called the 22 deletion test.
22 deletion syndrome is a genetic disorder in which a small piece of chromosome 22 is missing. It can result in developmental delays, small stature, defects in the palate, and in the worst cases, life-threatening heart conditions.
Our jaws both dropped. And now we started to both wonder, will she be normal? Is she normal? Is she going to be able to, function on her own?
When I finally got to hold Kylie, it was scary, and I'd never been afraid of my child before. It was different. She was so tiny. She was so tiny, and I was so worried. I don't think there's a word in the English language that could have described how anxious we were for the results to come back.
The Testing was negative. She didn't have the 22 chromosome deletion.
I didn't know whether I wanted to say, yippee, she has no 22 deletion, or, oh my God, what's wrong with my child? If it's not that, then what on earth could it possibly be?
Back to square one, the medical team begins performing a round of tests, while Heather and Kylie begin to bond. But nothing could have prepared her for what happens next.
I started to feed her, and then she got very blue, and her eyes kind of rolled into the back of her head, and she completely stopped breathing. I just started screaming, "Someone help me, please, my daughter's not breathing." It felt like an infinity before there was a nurse in the room, and they grabbed her and they ran. I have never been so scared in my entire life.
And now we started to both wonder, is there more to this that we know about? We really thought the worst. We had no idea what was going on.
They decided that they were going to take her to their neonatal intensive care unit. It's impossible to describe what I saw when I walked into that room. This tiny, fragile baby, connected to more machines than I knew ever existed. She was on oxygen. I couldn't even find my baby underneath that mess, and it was horrifying.
At that point, we both looked at each other and wondered if Kylie was even going to make it through the night. And it floored both of us.
In a race against time, the doctors begin performing test after test, hoping to find some clue. But with each passing day, they're no closer to an answer. And the family begins to wonder how much more their little girl can take.
Kylie struggled for every breath. She would gasp. It was like watching a fish breathe out of water. All of my instincts were to grab her and scoop her up and run home with her, and everything would be okay. And I couldn't even touch her. I was lost. I felt so out of place. My job as her mother didn't exist.
Worse still, the burden of juggling hospital visits with a full house begins to take its toll on the Monicas.
I needed to work. Heather needed to take care of the other children. So it made it even that more difficult because we couldn't be with her as often as we wanted to.
All I wanted to do was be by her side. I just wanted to sit next to her and watch every breath she took, because every single one counted. But we just couldn't let one tragedy create another. I had a family at home that needed me as much as the baby in the hospital needed me.
Every day we didn't know if we were going to get a phone call or not saying that Kylie didn't make it through the night. She was so unstable and she was just rapidly declining.
I was absolutely terrified that my daughter was going to die.
A month ago, Kylie Monica was born weighing only 5 pounds and exhibiting a bizarre set of birth defects, a cleft palate and a deformed thumb. Since then, her distraught parents Joe and Heather have watched their tiny daughter struggle for every breath.
We really felt like we needed to prepare ourselves for a child to be lost. We thought we were going to lose Kylie that first month of life.
After reviewing scores of tests, the medical team now believes they know what's causing her breathing problems.
The doctor explained that Kylie had an atrial septal defect, an ASD.
An atrial septal defect, or ASD, is a congenital condition commonly known as a hole in the heart. If it's not surgically repaired, the condition can be fatal.
That was just so scary because that just took her whole health to a different level for me, and I was terrified. She couldn't have the heart surgery till she was at least 10 pounds. She was now down to 4 pounds. The doctors explained to us that we could do the same things for her at home that they were doing in the hospital, and I was more than willing to do anything to get her home. So Kylie was discharged. If I thought it was hard juggling the kids at home and trips to the hospital, it was very difficult having her home. The living room actually ended up being converted into Kylie's hospital room.
It was stressful with the other children being around because we were always afraid that they would touch something they shouldn't or They might pull a tube or pull one of her IVs or something that was attached to her.
Every day, Kylie got a little sicker. And when she would try and breathe, it just sounded like she was sucking on a sponge. The doctors just couldn't do anything for her. She just continued to deteriorate right before our eyes.
We didn't know that Kylie would ever be strong enough for the surgery, although they did say she wouldn't be able to survive without it. Our question was, would she survive leading to it? Because she just wasn't getting there.
Kylie had a apnea monitor, and that would alarm us if there was any lack of breathing, and I would find myself counting her breaths. I thought that the only reason she was taking another breath was because in my head and in my heart, I was counting another number for her. I felt like I had to keep her going because I thought she was going to die.
Then, one afternoon, when Kylie is 10 months old, Heather's worst fears suddenly seem to be coming true.
Kylie's apnea monitor went off and just would not stop. The heart rate was going up, and she was having such difficulty breathing. It was frightening. I just knew I had to get her to the ER.
Panicked, Heather rushes her to the hospital, calling Joe on the way. 15 minutes later, Kylie is admitted to the pediatric intensive care unit. But despite frantic efforts, the medical team can't stabilize her breathing.
So they actually had to take her to the operating room to be able to do an emergency tracheostomy. They decided that she needed additional respiratory support. I had an absolute meltdown. I cried and prayed like I had never prayed before in my life.
And the doctor had come back to Heather and I, and we could see that he had a worried look on his face. We had asked, why is this happening? And he said she was in congestive heart failure.
Congestive heart failure is a sometimes fatal condition in which the heart isn't able to pump enough blood to the body's organs. It can lead to a buildup of fluid in the lungs, which makes it impossible to breathe.
He didn't feel confident that tracheing her was going to give her the respiratory support that she needed, and we should probably get her baptized as quick as possible. I couldn't handle that. Somebody isn't supposed to tell you that your child's probably going to die tonight. I knew that if I lost her, or when I lost her, that I was not going to be a functioning human being. But I was convinced Kylie was going to die that night. I stayed in the hospital and I held her little hand all night long. I couldn't let her go. She had to be fixed. I had to fix her. She deserved so much more than to be lying in that bed.
Through the night, Heather sits vigil beside Kylie's bed. And in the morning, her prayers appear to be answered.
The doctor came back and said that it was looking a lot better, that the lungs were a lot clearer. I was euphoric.
They just didn't believe that a child born with all these defects would not have some type of syndrome connected with it. And they said they needed to do more genetic testing.
That day we saw a geneticist. She looked at Kylie, she looked at Kylie's history, and she said, I think this isn't necessarily about Kylie's heart pumping the blood through her body wrong, but I think this is actually an issue with the blood. So I really think that you guys need to go see this team of hematologists in Long Island.
That afternoon, Kylie is transported by ambulance 70 miles north to Cohen Children's Medical Center in New Hyde Park, New York, where hematologist Dr. Jeffrey Lipton is waiting to take over her case.
The idea was to look for some sort of common thread that could put her symptoms together. The next thing we needed to do was a bone marrow biopsy to see if she was unable to make certain blood cells. When I looked at the bone marrow, there were no red blood cells. With a constellation of physical abnormalities and a bone marrow that was unable to make red blood cells. This was a classic case of diamond blackfan anemia.
Diamond blackfan anemia is a genetic disorder of the bone marrow. In healthy individuals, bone marrow produces red blood cells, which carry oxygen to the body's organs. But in patients like Kylie, a genetic mutation causes the bone marrow to malfunction, which leads to a severe deficiency of red blood cells.
Anemia is just not having enough red blood cells in your body to pick up oxygen in the lungs and deliver it to the tissue. Every tissue in your body requires oxygen to live.
And it was an emotional moment for both of us. We had an answer, but we were both a little confused. We didn't know what that meant.
Joe and Heather listen as Dr. Lipton explains that Kylie's defects, though not present in every DBA patient, are all a direct result of the disease.
Some patients with diamond blackfan anemia, besides being anemic, have a variety of birth defects. These birth defects are the consequence of the same mutation that causes the anemia.
In addition, the genetic abnormality also led to the hole in her heart, making it extremely difficult for Kylie to breathe.
Kylie's severe anemia contributed to her inability to breathe normally. The lungs weren't being oxygenated and were not functioning normally. The failure to treat a profoundly anemic baby will result in death.
It just hit us like a ton of bricks. Joe and I just looked at each other and just couldn't believe it.
Now we were able to put a finger on it, but what does that mean? Does that mean that you can fix it? Does it mean that you can heal it, treat it? We needed answers.
The first thing was to get her on a regular transfusion program with red blood cells every 3 weeks.
Over the next 18 months, Kylie receives blood transfusions that keep her alive. And finally, she's strong enough to undergo corrective surgeries for her thumb, cleft palate, and heart.
She was definitely well on her way to being a normal, happy toddler. She had this infectious giggle, and she started talking, and it was the best feeling in the world.
And in October of 2001, after nearly 20 months in the hospital, the moment Joe and Heather have yearned for arrives. Kylie goes home for good.
When Kylie finally came home, it was definitely one of the happier moments in our lives. It was like her being born all over again.
But there is still one more hurdle for 2.5-year-old Kylie to overcome.
With the transfusions being so frequent, the side effects of transfusion started to become real.
Kylie's blood transfusions are leaving her with a buildup of dangerous, even deadly amounts of iron in her body. Her only hope is a bone marrow transplant, which can generate red blood cells.
It became abundantly clear very quickly that we had to do the transplant as soon as possible.
Because of the severity of her particular case, Dr. Lipton said the only way that he would even consider doing a bone marrow transplant on Kylie would be if it was an exact match sibling only. Heather and I were tested. We were not matches. All the children were tested. They didn't match Kylie. So at that point, we were very upset. Without the transplant, we didn't know if she was going to actually survive.
Since the day she was born, Kylie Monica faced terrifying health problems. In addition to suffering from strange defects, her heart was failing. But once Dr. Jeffrey Lipton identified the rare condition causing all of the complications, diamond blackfan anemia, the Monica family thought they were in the clear. Until now. Kylie's in desperate need of a bone marrow transplant from a sibling, but none of them are a match.
So then it was up to Heather and I to decide how we were going to proceed with this. Were we going to have more children and try to find a match for Kylie?
Here was a perfect opportunity that our desire to have more children was actually imperative. That if we were going to save our daughter, we needed to have a baby to match her.
Then Heather became pregnant with Jordan. And Jordan is our little girl who was Kylie's match.
We had a very successful transplant that enabled Kylie for the first time to make red blood cells. This, for us, was a very, very happy moment.
My sister Jordan gave me her blood so I can live. I'm very thankful for her because she saved my life.
She was definitely well on her way to being a normal child.
Kylie's prognosis is really quite good. Her anemia is cured.
The Monicas are thrilled with Kylie's miraculous recovery. But now, they can't help but wonder why it took so long to identify the deadly disease.
Diamond blackfan anemia is incredibly rare. By our best estimates, only 20 to 50 children are born each year in the United States and Canada with diamond blackfan anemia. In Kylie's situation, she had so much going on. With her birth defects, the focus was really on solving those problems and not necessarily putting everything together.
Today, Kylie is a happy, healthy 11-year-old and one of 10 siblings.
I like being part of a big family. I like to play outside, play with my sisters or brothers. I have a dog named Kazoo, and he follows me everywhere and cries if he's not with me.
She loves to jump on the trampoline. She loves to play school. She comes home from school and just plays school. She just has this desire for knowledge.
When I grow up, I want to be a nurse. The nurses were my friends when I was in the hospital. I want to be friends with other people who are sick in the hospital.
She loves what everyone has done for her, and she wants to pay it back. As far as everything she's been through, she is just a positive personality, magnetic. That's the only way to describe it.
I am who I am today because of her. I hope she knows someday how much of an inspiration that she has been, not just for me, but many other people. I tell people all the time, not many people get to meet their heroes. I got to give birth to mine.
My biggest advice to other families would be, don't let one tragedy create another tragedy. And you need to do everything you can to keep going on and moving on for your child as well as each other.
Next, star athlete Michael Iniguez was a portrait of health until a mysterious illness suddenly threatened to kill him within just a matter of days. In the winter of 2008, 17-year-old Michael Iniguez was counting down the months to his high school graduation in Petaluma, California.
Everything was going really great. I was enjoying the last semester, my senior year with my friends, and just focusing on getting ready to graduate and go away to school.
Michael was your typical high school kid. He loved going to school and seeing all his friends and buddies. And then after school, his passion was sports.
I really wanted to play Division I college soccer. That was pretty much what I worked towards.
A couple of college coaches were very interested in seeing him attend their school. Our family was so proud of Michael.
We had a very close-knit family. To be able to watch him play on the field and do something that he loved was one of the best experiences for us.
I was in the best shape of my life at that point. I was running all the time. I was just looking forward to playing college soccer.
However, as the second semester starts in January, Michael has no idea that his life is about to change forever.
I remember getting up and knowing right away I wasn't going to school. My throat was hurting a lot, and I could feel that it was swollen. I tried to swallow, and I couldn't. It was just more painful than any sore throat I'd ever had.
He says, "Dad, my throat is killing me." So we got into the car and drove down to the doctor's.
I remember her saying, "This is the worst sore throat I've ever seen." And the only time she's ever seen a sore throat this bad was mono.
Mono, or mononucleosis, is a viral infection, which often keeps patients in bed and exhausted for months.
I was pretty bummed that I was getting near the end of my senior year and getting ready for soccer. I just really wanted to be in tip-top shape.
The doctor wanted to do a blood test to test specifically for mono and told us to come back in 5 days for the result. In the meantime, she prescribed a steroid to reduce the swelling in his throat and also pain medicine.
But while they're waiting for the test results, Michael's health takes a dramatic turn for the worse.
He had a fever each day. It seemed to be getting higher and higher. It was probably 103.
I developed chills, I'd get night sweats. No matter how many blankets I had, and I'd shake and just be freezing and sweating and have a headache and just feel terrible. And my throat was still hurting a lot. I'd never felt as sick as that in my life.
It was very hard for me to see him so sick. At that point, we were very anxious to get those mono test results to make sure that that's what we were dealing with, because he just was sicker than I've ever seen him in my life. I just didn't know what was happening.
Over the past 5 days, 17-year-old Michael Iniguez has been suffering from an excruciatingly painful sore throat, sky-high fevers, chills, and night sweats. While his doctor is confident that he has a classic case of mono, she's running a test to confirm her hunch.
I was pretty anxious to get the mono results back. I'd never felt that horrible before in my life.
Now, on his way to see the doctor, he notices something very odd about his feet.
I put my shoes on and they were really, really tight for some reason. And I was like, this is weird. I think my feet are really swollen.
I didn't think much of it other than maybe it was possibly a symptom of mono. I said, well, we'll just mention it to the doctor. And then we drove down to the appointment.
And the doctor told me I didn't have mono. When I heard that, I was concerned because I thought it was probably something worse.
Determined to figure out what's triggered the baffling symptoms, the physician conducts another head-to-toe exam. And when she discovers that his feet are extremely swollen, she drops a bombshell.
She thought, hey, we should probably get a blood test to check your kidneys because sometimes swollen feet means that something's wrong with your kidney function. At that point, I knew it was more serious than I first thought.
I was very concerned that something was very wrong with him. So we had the lab work done and we were sent home and just waited for a phone call from the doctor that afternoon. I was playing the previous days back in my mind and I started to sense, well, there is something more going on with my son. And now I wanted the doctors to just do everything that they could do to find out what was wrong with Michael.
5 hours later, the doctor calls with news that sends the family reeling.
The kidney test showed that Michael's kidneys were failing. She did not know why they were failing, but she basically told me, I have contacted a kidney specialist. You need to get Michael in the car and take him to the hospital right now.
The kidneys clean out toxins, an essential function of the body. If kidney failure isn't stopped or reversed, the results can be deadly.
I was so scared when she told us that Michael's kidneys were failing. I thought, oh my gosh, what is wrong with Michael? I could not believe I was hearing this. The situation was very urgent. It was a matter of life and death at that point.
It started clicking in my head that this was really bad.
Terrified, Stuart and Cheryl race their son to the hospital. But to their horror, Michael begins to visibly deteriorate on the way there.
He was not able to stay awake. I sat in the back seat with Michael and I kept saying, Michael, you gotta wake up. I was so afraid that if he would fall asleep, he could slip into a coma and not wake up.
When we got to the hospital, they wheeled our son into the ICU, and as soon as they checked his blood pressure, they found that it was dangerously low, and that was a major, major concern for them.
If his blood pressure continues falling, Michael's lungs will fill up with fluid and prevent him from breathing.
It was so chaotic. There were doctors and nurses hooking him up to all these IVs and machines, and they were taking blood. I was asking myself, how could this be happening? How did he get this sick and so fast?
I didn't really get what was going on. A week ago, I was super fine, and now I'm in a hospital bed, and people are sticking IVs in me.
Finally, a doctor said there is some kind of infection going on in his body, and we don't know why. Your son is going into septic shock. His body is shutting down.
Septic shock is an often fatal condition in which a massive infection causes total organ failure.
My worst fear at that point was that Michael might have some kind of life-threatening illness that maybe the doctors didn't know about, and it was just making him worse by the minute. We didn't know what was going on, and we felt helpless.
I remember just laying in my bed, just confused and scared, wondering, what the heck is going on with me right now? I thought maybe I was gonna die.
Just a week ago, 17-year-old star athlete Michael Iniguez was in perfect health. Now, after coming down with a seemingly ordinary sore throat, he's fighting for his life. His kidneys are failing, and he's in septic shock.
He was hooked up to all these monitors, and he's got needles and tubes coming out of his body, and he's just laying there motionless. We were scared and very worried that there was something really, really bad going on inside his body. We just kept asking ourselves, what could it be?
But until the medical team figures out what triggered the terrifying turn of events, they don't know how to treat him.
They started to give him 4 different kinds of antibiotics. They just didn't know what they were fighting. At that point, they were still taking lots of tests, lots of blood cultures.
And the doctor said that we had to wait 24 hours for the result. In the meantime, our son was fighting for his life, and there was nothing that we could do.
The next 24 hours are agonizing as Stuart and Cheryl wait for the results. And when the findings are in, they are nothing short of shocking.
The results of the blood test came back negative. They could not give us any kind of answers as to what was causing his kidneys to fail.
And I asked the doctor if my son was going to die, and they could not answer me. They could not answer me. Michael's situation was getting worse and worse, and my thought was that maybe my son wasn't going to make it.
As the medical team searches desperately for answers, Michael's health continues to deteriorate by the hour.
Michael's breathing was getting more labored. I didn't know how long he could go on, and it just looked so hard for him.
He was coughing up fluid from his lungs. The doctor said that Michael has fluid in both lungs. He has double pneumonia.
The antibiotics at that point didn't seem to help at all. Michael was not able to breathe on his own, and he would need life support to breathe. We were so sad. It was just an awful thing to know that this machine would be the only thing keeping him alive at that time.
After 36 hours in the ICU, Michael has to be hooked up to a ventilator.
I remember watching my chest go up and down, and I wasn't even doing anything. It was doing it for me. I thought, if I'm too weak to even breathe, this is bad.
The first time I saw my son with a tube down his throat and a machine was helping him to breathe, that was the first time for me that I thought to myself, there's a chance that my son could die.
Over the next 3 days, the mysterious infection rages, and Michael's body continues to shut down.
Michael's liver was starting to fail. Everything in his whole body seemed to be going. At that point, I was losing hope that they would find an answer. I just kept hoping and praying they would figure it out before it was too late.
Then, on the 5th day in the ICU, Pediatrics Critical Care Fellow Dr. Tom Arnold is assigned to Michael's case. As soon as he begins reviewing his file, Dr. Arnold notices something unusual about Michael's lungs.
Oftentimes, pneumonia will originate in just one component of the lung. But Michael's pneumonia was different. When I looked at the chest x-rays, I could see small pockets of infection throughout the lungs. When I considered his primary symptoms and a pneumonia of this type, I had a good idea of what this might be. So I went to talk to the parents.
Dr. Arnold mentioned that Michael had all the symptoms of what he suspected was wrong, except for one. So he ordered a CT scan of Michael's neck.
I thought, oh my gosh, this doctor might know how to make my son better. And we were just waiting on pins and needles to find out the answer.
We couldn't do anything for him other than just pray for him and hope that everything was going to be all right.
For nearly a week, 17-year-old Michael Iniguez has been in the ICU, hanging on to his life by a thread. A mysterious infection is causing his body to shut down by the hour.
Everything seemed to be getting infected. Stuart and I were so desperate to get an answer for what was making Michael so sick.
But now, Dr. Tom Arnold thinks he knows what's wrong and is running a test to confirm his hunch.
The CT scan of Michael's neck revealed that he had a fairly large blood clot in part of the jugular vein. The jugular vein is the primary vein draining the head and brain. That associated with his sore throat, the septic shock, and this progressive pneumonia really clinched the diagnosis of Lemierre's disease.
Lemierre's disease is a life-threatening bacterial infection. Normally, when bacteria enter the bloodstream, the immune system fights them off. But in patients like Michael, bacteria collect to build a blood clot in the jugular vein. Pieces of the infected clot then splinter off, travel through the bloodstream, and cause organ failure.
It's a little like a farmer spreading seeds throughout a field, and you have a primary pocket of seeds that then gets spread all throughout the field. The entire body gets seeded with this bacteria, and it makes you very sick.
I was so relieved we could finally figure out what Michael had. But at that point, I didn't know much about it. I didn't know how bad it was.
Dr. Arnold explains that the bacteria attacked Michael's throat first and then traveled to his nearby jugular vein.
The body responds by trying to sort of wall that infection off. As part of that, it begins to create a blood clot. The bacteria grows well inside of this blood clot, living on the nutrients from the body itself.
In a very short period of time, the blood clot splinters, sending the dangerous bacteria to every part of the body. And as Michael's organs became infected, they started to shut down.
If we missed the diagnosis, he would have had continued blood pressure problems, which means that your brain and heart don't get enough blood flow. Eventually, he would die from that.
We were relieved, but until we saw any kind of improvement, we weren't getting our hopes up too much.
It was urgent that we started him on the correct antibiotics for this disease. However, he was still in a critical condition, and it's often difficult to say how quickly people will recover.
As his parents wait anxiously, Dr. Arnold administers a set of specific antibiotics targeted to wipe out the infection. And within just 24 hours, Michael begins showing signs of improvement.
It was pretty surprising for us. A day after starting the antibiotic, we were able to take him off the ventilator.
That was probably the best I've ever felt in my entire life. As soon as they took out my breathing tube, I said, "Hi, Mom."
I just started crying. It was just amazing. It was amazing. And that was one of the happiest days of my life.
Over the next week, Michael begins to recover. But just when the family thinks he's out of the woods, a dangerous complication emerges.
An echocardiogram showed that one of the valves in his heart was beginning to sort of fall apart. This can happen sometimes with Lemierre's disease.
because it would put too much strain on the valve. One of the limitations put on Michael was that he would not be able to play athletics at a competitive level.
It kind of took me a while to really finally accept that I wasn't gonna be playing in college. But at that point, I was focusing on getting better and getting stronger.
Finally, on February 21st, his 16-day ordeal is over, and Michael is strong enough to go home.
I was really excited. I finally got to go back to school and graduate with all my friends. It was really awesome.
Michael's prognosis is terrific. I mean, he should really be able to lead a normal life.
While the Iniguezes are thrilled that their son survived the harrowing ordeal, they can't help but wonder why no other doctor was able to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
If you're treated with an antibiotic through the bloodstream, oftentimes you can kill the bacteria just in the bloodstream, but still have the infection running rampant in other parts of your body, but just not detected in the blood. So that's why we weren't able to recover the bacteria. Another tricky part of diagnosing Lemire's disease is just how rare it really is.
Today, Michael is 20 years old and considering a career in the medical field. But most importantly, he's determined to live his life to the fullest.
The biggest change this experience has made is just kind of my outlook on life, not taking a lot of things for granted and not letting little things become a big deal because they really don't matter that much.
I believe that Lemire's has made him a stronger person. I think it brought Michael to a new place in his life.
I've always been proud of my son. He's a survivor, and this was not going to get the better of him, and he was going to fight until he won, and he did win.
If I could talk to someone going through anything similar, I would just tell them to just constantly be telling themselves that they're going to get better and that they're going to get through it, and to never doubt that.